welcome to this tutorial on how to make a sunflower out of wafer paper. So first we are going to start with this Wilton mold. It's got this really nice big textured center here. So I'm just taking some light brown fondant and I'm going to add some Tylose powder to my fondant. This just makes the fondant more like a gum paste. It'll just make it dry harder and dry faster. This Wilton mold can be found in my Amazon shop. I'll put the link in the description. Once you've kneaded all the Tylose into the fondant, I like to just roll it into a ball, and then I'm going to place it into that Wilton mold here. I'm just gonna press firmly, and then I'll pinch off the excess fondant and start shaping it with my fingers. And I'm just gonna pop this out just to show you what it looks like. So it's really textured. Kind of gives the same look as the center of a sunflower. I'll be using this 24 gauge floral wire. You can find this in my Amazon shop. I will link it in the description. That's what it looks like. I cut the floral wire to about 6 inches for this project. So now I'm just going to take some of my edible glue. This can be found on my website, lhcakery.com. So I'm just going to take this floral wire and dip it into the edible glue and insert it into the fondant, making sure you don't press down too hard. You don't want it to come out through the front. And then kind of just tuck the fondant around that floral wire so that it's in there nice and secure. You should be able to just pick it up and hold it without the wire falling off. Now I'll be using these Wilton flower formers. These are really great. They help keep the shape of your flower. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna add some foil in here, and it just keeps the same exact shape of that Wilton flower former, but we can still pick it up and manipulate it. For the wafer paper, I'll be using premium wafer paper from Icing Images. It's pre-colored, it's this beautiful, vibrant color, and I love to work with it. For this part, you're just gonna need a pair of scissors. So I'm going to trim off 1 inch wide of this yellow wafer paper. So this strip of wafer paper is 1 inch by 7 inch. You're just gonna fold that in half, and then you're gonna fold it in half once more. And now you're ready to cut out some little petals here. So I'm just cutting out a rough shape of some sunflower petals. You want to have about 20 of this size. I had only cut out 16, so I'm going to cut out another 1 inch strip, and then I just need 4 more of those petals. Now for this step, we're going to use a petal pad. You can also find this in my Amazon list, as well as this Dresden tool. Now the one in my Amazon list is yellow, but it's the same thing. And we're going to be using the left side, the sharper side of the Dresden tool. We'll also be using a little bit more of my edible glue. So what you're going to do is lay the little petal on your petal pad, dip the Dresden tool in the edible glue, and then we're just going to make a little line there. It kind of curves your wafer paper a little bit, and it just gives that little line for texture. Repeat this step for the rest of these petals. So now we're going to make some petals that are slightly larger. We're going to need about 12 of these larger sizes. I'm just using the leftover wafer paper that I had previously used. If you don't have any wafer paper left over, you'll just cut another 1-inch strip, fold it in half again, and then cut the petals slightly larger than last time. They're laying next to each other so you can see the size difference. Now that I have the 12 larger petals cut out, we're just going to repeat the same step we did to the smaller ones. We're just getting a little bit of edible glue on the sharp part of the back of the Dresden tool, and then we're just going to run it along the center of that petal just to create that nice line there. Repeat this for all of the 12. So now we're going to grab the Wilton mold again, and then we're just going to place that fondant center in the middle again, and this just makes it easy when you're going to glue your petals on. Grab your edible glue and a paintbrush, and we're just going to paint the back of this fondant here with some of that edible glue so that these wafer paper leaves will stick. I'm going to attach the smaller size of the wafer paper petals first, and you can see I'm gluing them more towards the edge. I don't want to go all the way in to where that wire is because you won't see the whole petal. I'm placing them spaced out to begin with, and then I'll start overlapping. When you place petals on top of another petal, be sure to add some more edible glue so that it sticks. And just keep gluing all of these petals on the fondant until you've used all 20 of them. And this is what it looks like so far, and if you do need to move any of those petals over, now is the time to do it before the glue dries all the way. Now is the time to add those bigger petals. We have 12 of those. Just overlap them where you see any gaps. Make sure you add a little bit of edible glue before you add each petal. Here's what it looks like now. It's starting to come together. It's getting more full. You see the different sizes of petals. It's starting to look really great. And while the glue is not completely dry, I like to move over some of the petals just to make sure you fill in any of those little gaps. Now you can place your sunflower in the foil-lined flower former for now. You'll want to place this on top of a cup, that way your floral wire has somewhere to go so that it doesn't bend sideways. Next, we are going to be using the Wilton piping tip number 18, and this is going to give the center of your sunflower some texture. I'm going to be making another circle shape within the center of the sunflower using the piping tip, and I'm going to make sure I completely fill in the entire circle with this piping tip, and it's just going to give a little bit more texture. So this is what it should look like. I have a paint palette lined with plastic wrap. That's just for easy cleanup when we're done. I'll be using my favorite edible paints, poppy paints. You can also find them in my Amazon shop. Link is in the description, and we will be using brown. And we will also be using yellow. If you don't want your paints to be too dark, you can also add some poppy paint thinner, or you can add some Everclear to your paint. I'll be adding the brown poppy paint to the center of the sunflower, just in that circular area where I added the texture from the Wilton piping tip. With the yellow paint, I'll just be outlining that brown circle. Now we are going to cut out some smaller petals, and those are going to be a 1/2 inch, so I just cut that 1 inch in half there, and I'm just cutting the tiniest little petals. You want to have approximately 22 to 28 of these tiny little petals. Now I'll be using the Penblade number 15. This is a retractable blade, and you'll notice the blade is a little bit wider than Penblade number 11, the orange one, which is another favorite of mine. So this is where your foil comes in handy. Now you can take the foil out, but you can still hold your sunflower. I'm making little cuts. You can see that right there. So I'm making little cuts, and this is so that we can stick in those tiny little petals so that they have somewhere to go. I don't want them just laying on top of the other petals. It wouldn't look as realistic as this method here. So just make little cuts all the way around. Just make sure that they don't connect, because if they connect, then you're basically just cutting around the whole thing. I'm just making little holes for those little tiny petals to go right inside. Just do this all the way around. Before I add those tiny little wafer paper petals in there, I'm just adding some of my edible glue to those little cuts just to ensure that it sticks. And pick up your tiny little petal and stick it right in there where you made that cut, and it stays nicely. Continue adding those tiny little petals in those little holes that you made, and if you have extra petals left over, I will show you what we do in a little bit. So if you have a few extra little tiny petals left over like I did, I'm just making another couple of cuts in front of the previous row and adding a little bit of edible glue and then inserting the tiny little petal there. When you finish adding all those final little petals, you just want to curve up your foil again just to keep that little bit of a curved shape. Not too much, but just a little bit. And then put it back in your flower former and rest it on top of your cup until that is fully dried. You can check in a few hours and see if it's fully dried so that you can move on to the next step. Once it's fully dried, you can grab some brown petal dust and a dry brush, and we're going to add an extra level of depth to this sunflower, just lightly dipping in my paintbrush. And I'm just dusting the rim of the sunflower. Do you see how it just brings out an extra level of depth there? It looks a little bit darker. Maybe the leaves are a little bit deeper in that area. It just makes it look a whole lot better. Now that it's done, we can pop our sunflower out of that cup, out of the foil, out of the flower former. Just grab it by the stem, and it's ready to add to any cake. And it's edible except for the floral wire. So it's pretty cool. You can make these as big or as little as you'd like. Here's a previous one that I've made, and I did make the center of the other one a little bit darker. You can make the center of yours darker or lighter depending on your preference. If you make multiple sunflowers, you can just dry them in an old piece of styrofoam until you're ready to use them. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Please be sure to like and subscribe.